Well, thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Conversations. My name is Chiwata Onyema. We'll now switch gears as we place our focus in Uganda now, as Uganda's political journey has been shaped by turbulence and continuity. From the brutal years of Idi Amin in the 1970s to the instability under Milton Obote, the country longed for stability when Yoweri Museveni seized power in 1986. Now, he came in, of course, as a liberator, promising democracy and a new dawn. Now, 4 decades later, Museveni remains in office, rewriting constitutions, abolishing term limits, and consolidating power through the military and the state institutions. His rule has brought relative stability, but also accusations of repression, corruption, and a clampdown on opposition voices. Now, Amnesty International has described recent crackdowns as a brutal campaign of repression. Now, as Uganda heads into another election, crowds rally behind opposition leader Bobi Wine, a musician turned politician who embodies the frustrations of a youthful population. Now, with more than 75% of Ugandans, of course, being under 30. Now, this contest is not just about ballots. It is about whether Uganda can break free from decades of entrenched leadership. In today's conversation, we trace Uganda's arc from Amin to Museveni, and now to maybe Bobi Wine. And then we ask the question, what does this election mean for Uganda's youth, for democracy in Africa, and for the global community watching closely? Now, joining me to dissect this are Deputy Team Leader, Agora Center for Research, Godwin Toko. And also joining me right now is Kato Tumise, who is a human rights activist, human rights lawyer and political analyst. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Let's get straight into the conversation. Now, I'm going to start with you, Godwin. How did Uganda's post-Amin and post-Obote instability paved the way for Museveni's rise in 1986?
Yes, thank you very much. It's everything. It's the reason Museveni rose to power. When Amin took over, Museveni was a young boy who had a job in the president's office, the president being Obote. So when Amin took over, he just ran to exile in Tanzania, neighboring Tanzania. And from there, he sharpened his Marxist theories. He had Tanzania borders Mozambique. So he moved to Mozambique and joined the guerrilla fighters there and learned guerrilla fighting techniques. Now, at a personal level, those gave him the experiences that later led him, enabled him to lead a guerrilla war that overthrew the government. But for the majority of Ugandans, what happened is that from 62, when Uganda got independence, there was a lot of skirmishes there was squabbles within the government based on ethnicity, based on religion. 66, it really boiled over in 71 with Idi Amin Dada's coups, military coup. Now, Idi Amin's time was one of turbulence. The economy was run down. There was a lot of neglect. There was a lot of human lives that were lost. There was a lot of brutality. The state was really against the people. There's one particular report by the International Commission of the Jurists that say as many as probably 500,000 people were killed during Amin's time. But to give it better context, Uganda's population at that time was just about 8 million. So that should paint how bad that period was. Now, Ugandans started rallying around change, looking for, in Uganda, the saying is that as long as I can sleep, that during the Amin years, you could not get as much as the comfort of a good night's sleep without men in uniforms knocking at your doors, maybe abducting your brother, maybe abducting your sister. Anything became suspicious. So that really put Ugandans in a position where anything but that can enable them to have a night's sleep became the mantra around which Museveni rallied, started a guerrilla warfare with a couple of his university students and friends, and eventually that led to the overthrow of Obote too. Because after Amin was overthrown, we had very, very unstable regimes there. There was Lule, there was Bina Issa, there was Paulo Mwanga, and then you have Museveni. You have Obote again coming back in 1980 in what was, by all accords, a very, very massively rigged election. In fact, that election's rigging was the spark, and that's why it's the irony in Uganda that now, if under Museveni, elections still get rigged, because they simply said, if the election is rigged, me, I'm going to the bush. Going to the bush in Ugandan speak means starting a guerrilla warfare. And he kept his word, started a guerrilla warfare that lasted 5 years and eventually became president. So after Museveni became president, even today, if Museveni makes a speech of more than an hour, and these speeches tend to be as long as that, the average speech of the president goes for about an hour, he always makes reference to Amin, how Amin failed Uganda, how Amin failed Africa, how they were bad people. For Ugandans, even the constitution we have right now, the 1995 constitution, the preamble begins with recalling our turbulent history. So to put it plainly, it is everything for Ugandans. That past was everything we thought we had run away from. We wanted to forget. It was the nightmare. Unfortunately, with hindsight now, I wasn't born when Amin was president. In fact, it was several years into President Museveni's rule that I was born. It's interesting that I'm now speaking to you as an adult and a parent, and Museveni is still the president. But the thing is that to this day, many Ugandans now begin to make the comparison and say, did we really break this curse of being the skunk of the world, of being this laughing stock of the world? Because what were we running away from? Abductions, extrajudicial killings, rigged elections, gross human rights violations, an economy that doesn't serve the needs of the native people. And we seem to have all that back, unfortunately.
All right, thank you so much for giving us a brief history and for us to understand exactly what we're dealing with now, what we're facing as regards Ugandan history and politics. Let me come to you now, Kato. Now, what constitutional changes, including, the removal of term and age limits, have enabled Museveni's longevity in power? We're talking since 1986, that's 40 years now.
Well, thank you so much. I think Godwin has given a very good preamble. But to say that people talk about the only 2 amendments in the Constitution, but they have, I think, about 20 or plus amendments that have been made in the Constitution 30 years back. And the funny bit is that all these constitutional amendments lead to one side of having President Museveni remain in power by whatever means are available for him. He will use it, and he has actually threatened on a number of times that if elections did not go well, if institutions do not do what they're supposed to do so that he can still be in power, he'll go back to the bush. And I can imagine an 82-year-old man going back to the bush because he has failed the count of 40 years. Yes, we admit that even some say that the amendments in the Constitution, removing the term limit, age limit, and all that, maybe were to give him a very good retirement. That's how they started by saying that if we maybe add him an extra term, he cannot go beyond 75 as provided for the Constitution. Little did we know that we had actually opened his eyes that he could become a lifetime president, that he has used institutions of government, the legislature itself, and the judiciary, that whatever the legislature passes or puts into place, whoever him continue to rule this country, then it will be actually supported and cemented by the judiciary. But the systems we have here are run by one man, one order. That even when Idi Amin, the former president, used the legal notices, that now we are worse than even the time of legal notices, where we knew that whatever was supposed to be law would be issued under legal notice. But here, we have a president who has been in power, that he has been in power and too much, I should call obsessed with this power, that he does not even issue legal notices, but he goes ahead to write a note, a paper, and direct the Chief Justice or whoever heads any institution that this is what I want. That's how bad we are. That we have a constitution that is very good grounded, that provides for all these rights, like my colleague has said, and that a full chapter of about 30 articles, strictly speaking on the rule of law and how people must be respected. But now we have it in shelves, kept, and nobody wants to consider it. That even when we believe that the judiciary, which must be independent and must uphold, protect, and preserve the Constitution and the law, is sleeping on the job, that somebody will be abducted and kidnapped, the first disappearances. You go to court to have an habeas corpus, the writ is granted by the judiciary. After a few days, then they dismiss, blaming in words they have used that they cannot squeeze blood out of the stone. and a few days later, the president comes and says that we have been hiding this one in the fleet. That's how terrible it is. That the ritual that is still living in our constitution and different laws should be breathed life by the judiciary, which the judiciary is captured, that we are going into general elections where we see a number of different abuses happening, massive rigging, because it is visible that even the ballot papers have been, the ballot boxes have been taken to different areas with broken seats. That shows that really this might not be a free and fair election.
All right, let me. So, pardon me, but let me butt in here. Let me come back to you, especially Godwin. Now, tell me, how has Museveni's 40-year rule reshaped Uganda's, political institutions? When you compare it to the promises of liberation in the 1980s.
Yeah, so that's a good question. When Museveni took over power in 1986, he was everything that he is not today. One of my favorite pastimes is to look for his old speeches over the internet on any subject, whether it's about the economy. And he has a book. I encourage Africans who want to understand the psyche of our leaders to read it. It's called What is Africa's Problem? What is Africa's Problem is a collection of his earlier speeches, some of his writings and thoughts. And when you read it and you look at the person who has been in power for the last 40 years, especially for the last 20 years, let's say, because the first few years he seemed to push the narrative of following whatever he said. But it's like a gulf. There is a big gulf between them. So to put it plainly, one, he was a Marxist in the bush. In fact, the Western world was very scared of him, saying that a person like him couldn't take power. They looked at him as the person who was going to be Africa's Fidel Castro, another Cuba in the heart of Africa. And it's now a 360-degree turn from that. The economy in Uganda is one of the most liberal economies in the world. You can literally do anything. I don't know, like regulations, as long as you're not politically active and on the wrong side, regulations will barely touch you. So that is a change that has been very fundamental. He talked back then about human rights. Now the human rights violations in Uganda will rival any country on the African continent that has a bad record of human rights violation. Mention a human rights violation that you think is despicable, some indignation that you think Africans, black people like me, shouldn't suffer, at least in this part of the world where we are led by black people. I mean, I don't want it happening in the US, but then I understand maybe there's racism. But if you mention any indignation that Africans can suffer, it is happening in Uganda. There are people who are abducted and held incommunicado for several weeks. There's a particular gentleman called Sam Subuga, whose case I was following, who has been incommunicado for something. The last time I counted was about 11 weeks. And his family keep getting notes from soldiers and friendly people saying that he is in custody, but they've never seen him. So that is a very, very big change in Museveni's policy. The other thing that has really changed about Museveni is the issue of elections. When he just came to power, he said elections should be free and fair. And all credit to him, the first elections Ugandans had in the 80s and in the 90s to elect their local council leaders were the most peaceful, they were the most representative of people's views. But since then, elections in Uganda today are a military affair. The military spokesperson, the military commander, the military chiefs, the police chiefs are most active during elections. If you move through the streets of Kampala today, you would think that Kampala is preparing for war. They are armed personal carriers driving on the streets of Kampala in the name of an election that is happening on Thursday. So that's another major shift. So there's been, now the other thing that I could talk about is the institutions. Museveni was a man of institutions. He kept talking about how the problem of Africa was leaders overstayed in power and then they broke institutions. Like my colleague Katoto Musime put it rightly. Uganda today, and for me I wouldn't call it a one-man rule per se, it's a family rule. That's the way to understand. Of course, the family will have a head. In this case, the president of Uganda is the head of that family. But the minister of education is the president's wife. The commander of the army is the president's son. You have the president's nephews, nieces, cousins as powerful senior ministers in cabinet. Then you have the president's brother, Salim Saleh, who is a senior presidential advisor. But in Uganda, it is more than that. He's literally, to put it mildly, probably many people would say he's the vice president of Uganda, because every now and then he will summon all ministers, they will go to him. There was a president, I think it must have been the president of Gabon, who came to Uganda and he was flown. So he does not even stay in Kampala. He stays several kilometers, maybe like about 300 kilometers from the city, in the northern city called Gulu.
All right, Godwin. Apologies, but I have to just butt in here. Let me come back to you quickly, Kato. Can we talk about Amnesty International, describing Uganda's pre-election environment as a brutal campaign of repression. What evidence supports this claim?
Yeah, well, the evidence that supports the claim is there are a number of violations that has happened, including the arrest. The last time I checked, we had about 600 plus opposition supporters who had been arrested, arraigned in court, remanded just and fair in that manner. That we have so far lost about 5 lives because of the brutality of the police and the UPDF extrajudicial killings. This is what I'm talking about. That we have hundreds and hundreds on sick beds because they have been tortured, they have been beaten, they have been done all kinds of sorts of violations. That's what brings out the picture of unfairness in this election, a brutal election, and even today the United Nations Human Rights has also made it clear that the kind of elections that are happening in Uganda, supported by the different laws that have been put in place in this shortest period, show that this election might not be fair, and it has extremely provided and brought the image of a violent election that is never peaceful. And that's why most of the people are coming out to say that, you see, whatever we do in this election, we can come and vote, we shall protect our vote, and then we shall demand the vote if it is tampered with. Because we have already provided and leveled ground for the opposition to campaign, and then the question is, why do you put up an election where people must be killed in broad daylight, where people must spend the most of their time in cells? Because we have hundreds of supporters of the National Unity Platform that have been in detention or on remand for 5 years, no trial, no nothing, and we are still repeating the same. So Amnesty and their report is actually backed by the facts that are very visible everywhere.
All right, let me come back to you now, Godwin. Let's talk about Bobi Wine, former musician, now politician. Is he truly capable of being termed or being tagged as the breath of fresh air, or is it a case of any other person aside Museveni is fine?
It should be somewhere in the middle. There are those who are really any other person apart from Museveni. There are many of them. But also, it's about who Bobi Wine is. I mean, you have a 44-year-old going up against an 81-year-old. That's Uganda is. I think Ugandans below 40 make up about 80% of the population. So naturally, there are many more people who are, to whom Bobi Wine speaks than Museveni will, however much he tries. So yeah, that is another explaining factor. And then 3, Bobi Wine has always championed himself as a ghetto president. If I could explain that slightly, that he's this champion of the poor, champion of the forgotten, champion of the urban poor. Now, if you've been to Kampala, the urban poor really run Kampala. It's a border economy. There are so many poor people, but who live within the urban areas. So to that particular group of people, Bobi Wine really speaks, and he doesn't have to work much to get their votes if the election is free and fair. Because he himself was one of them, a musician who struggled to get to the top and eventually go to the top. He represents everything that they would basically want to be. So yes, so the answer is somewhere there in the middle. There are those who are just tired of Museveni, and the joke in Uganda is that if you put a yellow jerrycan and then put Museveni on the other side, some of those people would vote for the yellow jerrycan to lead Uganda, which of course is very, very unfortunate. But yes, there are people like that. So yeah, I think the answer is somewhere in between there.
All right, Kato, before we let you go, let's just get your final thoughts. What's your take on, as we count down to the election, what's your take on the whole situation right now?
Well, I call upon the security agencies and whoever thinks that they are in charge of this election to actually follow what the law says. If you have accepted to go into polls, then allow the people to make their choices. Our constitution says that the power belongs to us, the people. Then accept the decision that we shall take. And maybe lastly, as I talk about the people that are acting brutally, that are violating rights, is that there will be another Uganda after President Museveni, and they must know that whatever atrocities they are committing to the people of Uganda, they will be answerable in their individual capacity. And this is a call that everybody should put in their mind. But I call upon Ugandans to come and vote in large numbers. Make your choices. Don't be intimidated. It will all come to an end.
All right, let me come to you, Godwin. Your final thoughts.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Similar to my colleague Kato's, I just hope that we can have a peaceful election. At the start of this election, we had something similar to that. The rallies seemed very peaceful. People were just moving freely until it got to the middle of it, and then the ugly side of our elections manifested once more. So I hope that the final days, the elections are on Thursday. That basically leaves us with tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I hope that those will be peaceful. Maybe they can redeem. We can have whatever we have lost. And I also hope that the security forces don't get high-handed. I mean, we need the internet off. For the last maybe like 4 elections in Uganda or 3, each time we have an election, the internet goes off, social media is off. So I hope that they really don't engage in actions that are going to put down the credibility of the elections, because it's just an exercise for people to choose their leaders at the end of the day. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on Conversations.